Hello everyone, welcome to another video about Carl Jung's Red Book. As we've seen in the last video, the Red Book is a very interesting and unique book. However, it's also in a sense a bit crazy. We've learned a few things about how we can approach our soul, and in this part we're going to delve deeper into this exploration of our soul. So in the last video we've discussed two important concepts that Carl Jung put forward in relation to our soul, and these are the spirit of the times and the spirit of the depths. Through both of these concepts it can be explained why it's rather difficult to discover our soul, and this is basically the case because usually when we are awake, when we are conscious, when we are moving about in the world, we are living in the spirit of the times, while our soul resides in the spirit of the depths. And in order to connect with our soul, we kind of have to cross the boundary to the spirit of the depths. We've also already discussed that if we are focusing our energy on external things, such as a better career, a better salary, a nicer car, then we're kind of moving away from our soul. According to Jung, if we want to discover our soul and then interact with our soul, we have to look inward to our own mind, basically. And besides focusing too much on these external factors, there are some other examples that Carl Jung gives that kind of get into the way of us exploring our soul deeper. And Carl Jung, he spends quite a lot of time in the first few pages of the Red Book discussing these, well, I guess we can call them temptations that can drive us further away from discovering our soul. And in this video we're going to have a deeper look at what these temptations actually are. And perhaps even more importantly, we're also going to discuss how we can overcome these temptations. And well, you might wonder, why is this actually important? Why should we go on such a journey to discover our soul? And Carl Jung, I think he gives a very clear answer to this question. He says that the psychological rule says that when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside, as fate. That is to say, when the individual remains undivided and does not become conscious of his inner opposite, the world must perforce act out the conflict and be born into opposing halves. So this was written by Carl Jung in another book, in Aeon, and I think it really explains the importance that we should attach to this exploration of our own soul. So basically, if an individual is not conscious of his inner conflict between his conscious and his unconscious mind, then this conflict can have a very large impact upon the world. And on the other hand, according to Carl Jung, if individuals have kind of managed to integrate these opposing halves, then this would have a very positive effect upon the world. So this is also why I think that this exploration of the soul is a very important endeavor. So in the first video we've kind of discussed where we can actually find our soul, and also more importantly perhaps where we will not find our soul. And now we've also discussed why it is important that we go on such a journey. So after this introduction we can move to the main part of this video, which are the temptations that Carl Jung indicates can kind of tempt us to not go on this journey. And according to Carl Jung, if we can overcome these temptations, then we will be moving in the right direction to the discovery of our soul. So let's begin. According to Jung, the first temptation that we should overcome is to live by an example. Who betide those who live by way of examples? Life is not with them. If you live according to an example, you thus live the life of that example. But who should live your own life if not yourself? So live yourselves. I think that this is mainly the case, of course, because if you simply follow an example, you don't really have to think for yourself. And according to Jung, this also applied for following the law, following certain religions, etc. And they all make you kind of think less. They just make you, well, somebody that follows the law, follows the rules, follows the opinions of others. Moreover, according to Jung, if all the people would follow the same law and the same teachings, this would not really lead to any greater connection with each other or with the world. Instead, it would kind of lead to division and solitude. Jung wrote, for example, that laws and teachings held in common compel people to solitude, so that they may escape the pressure of undesirable contact, but solitude makes people hostile and venomous. Of course, I don't think that Jung meant that we should all just stop following the law or should just stop following any kind of religion. Instead, I think that he really wanted us to think for ourselves and to really question everything that we do. And Jung also argued that if people would really think for themselves and be encouraged to kind of find their own way and also actually be different than other people, then they would be happier and therefore the world would also be a better place. Therefore, he wrote, "Give people dignity and let each of them stand apart, so that each may find his own fellowship and love it. Power stands against power, contempt against contempt, love against love. Give humanity dignity and the trust that life will find the better way." So according to Jung, if people can manage to overcome this first temptation, the temptation of simply following an example set by others, or blindly following rules, customs or laws, then they will become true individuals. And it is through these true individuals that the world can become a better place. And I believe that this is the case because if people decide to truly be themselves, then they will also better understand other people that are also doing the same thing. And although this is of course a very difficult project to achieve, I think if everybody is already simply conscious of why they are doing certain things, then this will already lead us in the right direction. So yeah, I think that this is a very interesting and also beautiful argument. Basically, according to Jung, it's actually through differences that we will better understand each other. And I don't think he really meant any simple, superficial differences, such as dressing in a certain way or listening to a certain kind of music. But I think he really meant differences in the way that you lead your life, in the way that you organize your thoughts, and the way that you connect with your own soul and the community. That kind of brings us to the conclusion of this first temptation. I hope I've been able to explain it clearly. And now we can move to the second temptation that we should overcome in order to find our soul. I think that now with our discussion of the second temptation, we will see why Jung can also be rather controversial. So I think that most people would agree that it would be a good idea to overcome the first temptation. I'm not sure whether everyone will agree that it is a good thing to overcome the second temptation as well. So according to Jung, we should not only overcome the temptation of the devil, but we should also overcome the temptation of God. And this is rather difficult because according to Jung, even Christ failed to do so. He mentioned that Christ totally overcomes the temptation of the devil, but not the temptation of God, to good and reason. You still have to learn this to succumb to no temptation, but to do everything of your own will. Then you will be free and beyond Christianity. The second temptation also connects rather nicely to the first temptation, in the sense that you should not be tempted to do anything that is not according to your own will, and that you should be really free, and this also means free from the temptation of God or Christianity. So Jung, it sounds as if Jung is making an argument against religion or against believing in God. I'm not sure whether he really meant it in this way. Instead, what I think that this meant is that Jung did not want anyone to blindly commit oneself completely to either God or the devil. Instead, I think that Jung meant that one should acknowledge the power of both of these opposites and kind of recognize them as a force to be reckoned with in your life. Kind of a force that is either positive or negative, kind of a yin and yang idea. In this way, I think that the idea of God and the devil, they are kind of relate to other opposites as well, such as the opposite of good and evil, of order and chaos, of love and hate. I think that Jung meant that we should consider that all of these opposites are important in our lives, and that we should not really be tempted to exclude one opposite and commit completely to the other one. So similarly, one should not commit completely to chaos or completely to order, completely to love or completely to hate. One should kind of be open to all of these forces. This explains the following quote of Jung: "You open the gates of the soul to let the dark flood of chaos flow into your order and meaning. If you marry the ordered to the chaos, you produce the divine child, the supreme meaning beyond meaning and meaninglessness." I always get goosebumps when I read this quote because I think it's very powerful. And I think this also explains what Jung meant about the temptation of God. I think what Jung meant is that if you blindly follow a certain religion or God, then you might not be open to whatever might occur in your soul and whatever might come to the surface. I think it's thereby that if one can overcome the temptation of God or the temptation of order or chaos or whatever kind of opposite might be tempting, then one will be open to whatever will occur in one's soul, and thereby one can truly explore one's own soul. And this brings us to the last temptation that we will discuss in this video, which is the temptation to attach too much value to your virtues. He argued that if your virtues hinder you from salvation, discard them, since they have become evil to you. The slave to virtue finds the way as little as the slave to vices. So of course virtues in themselves, they're not really a bad thing, but what I think Carl Jung meant here, similarly to the last temptation about God, is that we should not control ourselves and our thoughts too much by focusing too much on one thing. I believe therefore that Jung meant that if we attach too much value to our virtues, that we are controlling our soul too much. And I think that's also why he wrote, "If you believe that you are the master of your soul, then become her servant. If you were her servant, make yourself her master, since she needs to be ruled." I think that the main theme therefore that kind of connects all of these temptations together is that we should not limit ourselves too much. Because if we put too much value to our virtues, then basically we are limiting ourselves, while according to Carl Jung, we should be more open to things that we might not necessarily like, such as chaos instead of order. A nice quote from Jung to sum all of this up is that we believe that we can eliminate the darkness with an intention, and in that way aim past the light. How can we presume to want to know in advance from where the light will come to us? I think that therefore the main purpose of this entire discussion by Jung of these temptations is that we should not blind ourselves from the light by limiting our scope of vision. Instead, we should not limit ourselves and be open to whatever our soul may tell us. And we can only be truly open to our soul if we can resist these temptations that might only push us further away from our soul. So yeah, I think that concludes our video. I want to thank you very much for listening. I hope you kind of made sense of all of this, and I hope I mentioned to explain it in a clear way. Please let me know in the comments below what you think about this entire discussion and what your thoughts are about these temptations. And I'm also curious if there are any other temptations that you might think hinder our discussion and our discovery of the soul. And hope to see you in the next video.